Welcome to this episode of Learn Everyday English, your roadway to English proficiency. Glad to have you with me again today. And before I start, there are three things that you can do for me. Hey, like the video, 1. 2, to subscribe to the channel. And 3, tell your friends about it so that they can benefit from these videos too, just like you. All right. We got something a little bit different today. You're going to have like a little chat. Or have you heard the term comprehensible input? Comprehensible input? That's just like information that you take in through like watching videos, listening to podcasts, reading a book. It's just any type of information that you can input into your mind, your brain. And it helps you learn and improve, say in your case, English. But if comprehensible input, the information can't be too simple or you won't benefit from it very, very much. Or it can't be too advanced, or we say it can't be over your head or way over your head, which is an expression in English which means kind of too difficult to understand. So we also use this hand motion. We say, well, that went, that went over my head. That was too difficult for me to understand. It was too confusing. So you need to make sure that the information or input that you're getting is at the right level. It should be a little bit higher than the level that you're at now, so it can kind of pull you up and keep you moving forward. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to tell you kind of a story, give you some information, background information first, and tell you a story or say a couple of stories based on an interesting video I watched. So this will be a good test and exercise for your listening comprehension. And at the end of the video, I'm going to have like a test of some couple questions and to see how well you followed the video, we say. See how well you understood the video and the information that I'm going to be talking about. And this video that I'm making today is interesting because I want to make a point. And that learning a foreign language, in my case Spanish, in your case English, has benefits too. So what happened was, sometimes you hear people say in English, I'm a YouTube junkie, as I told you in the last video. So I was scrolling through the video options. Scrolling means like to review through the list to see what's available. And there was a video that sounded interesting, and the title of the video was in Spanish, but I'm going to translate it into English. It says, China, born without the right to life. Born without the right to life. And I said, well, that sounds interesting. Let me watch this, because it's supposed to be in Spanish. This is quote unquote supposed to be in Spanish, but when I turned on the video and started watching it, the video was actually in French, but it had Spanish subtitles at the bottom. So at first I said, I don't know if I want to watch this, because now I have to read the Spanish subtitles, and that's more work. It'd be easier if I could just sit and listen to the Spanish, but now I have to read it, and then when you're reading, I can't really pay attention as well to the video because I'm focusing on trying to read. But I said, well, let me just read it anyway, and it turned out to be a very interesting video. It was made it's a little older video that was shot in China or filmed in China. And it was talking about some children in China called the Heihaizi, which is a translation like black children, not black skin-wise, but it means children that are kind of hidden away in the dark. And they also called these children extra children. And they were a result of a policy that was in China for a long time called the one-child policy. And this was implemented in or made into law in 1975 by the president of China back then, or 1979, Deng Xiaoping, because China was experiencing a big, we say, population boom. The population was growing very quickly, or we could say was exploding, and they wanted to try to limit the number of births in the country. So they came up with this one-child policy, so each family could only have one child. But since then, a little background, in 2015, China updated this policy so families could have 2 children. And then in 2021, they updated the policy again where families could have 3 children. But the original policy mainly applied to what were called Han Chinese, which is the majority of the population, I think about 91%. And those people, and they mainly lived in the urban or city areas, 51%. So this one-child policy didn't apply to certain ethnic groups, the ethnic minority groups in China. This didn't apply to them. And also, if you happen to live in the countryside where there was a lot of farming and agriculture, they made an exception. If your first child was a female, then you could request to try to have a second child, hoping that child would be a male, and they could help in the day-to-day operation of farming or agriculture. So that's called the one-child policy. Let's see what else. But this also led to a big problem in China because most families, wanted to have male children. And so this ended up turning into a situation where there are a lot more men in China than women. It's estimated that there are about 30 to 40 million more men than women in China. So you may have seen stories about this on the news where they have to look to other countries, maybe Vietnam, Thailand, to find women or wives for the men. So there was you say, well, why would somebody want to do this? So only have one child. What's the incentive? So these were the incentives for a family that followed this one-child policy. Usually they were given higher wages. Wages is just the money you make from working. They could attend or have opportunities to go to better schools or have their children go to better schools. They could get better jobs. They get better treatment and government assistance. And this would apply to health care and maybe getting a loan from the bank. But those who violated the one-child policy, there were problems for you. There were fines. I guess that could amount to, say, $900 a month. And this was a lot of money because the average annual pay or yearly pay was about $192 a year if you lived in the city, and only $91 a year if you lived in the country. So the fine was a lot of money. Also, you could have your wage or your pay cut at your job. You could actually maybe lose your job. You would have difficulty getting government assistance like health care and loans. And even your property, your land or your house, could be seized or taken by the government. So this is kind of the background we're dealing with in the one-child policy. And it's interesting, it's estimated that maybe about 13 million children were born under the one-child policy, but they were born as kind of second children or these extra children or these hidden children. They were children that were born kind of breaking the law or breaking the one-child policy. And this had bad effects, ramifications, we can say in English, for the children, because technically they don't exist in the eyes of the government, because these children that were born, the second children, they do not have a government-issued ID card or identification card or registration paperwork. They are denied help from the government, like getting health care they won't receive a formal education, so they can't go to school, because in order to go to school or go to the doctor or the clinic, you need to have this ID card or this registration paperwork. They're not likely to have a good job or job at all, a stable job, and they can't open a bank account. So life is very hard for these extra children, these Heihaizi, these hidden children in China. So I'm going to tell you 3 stories that I saw watching this video. So listen. So I'm going to ask you some questions. So the first story I want to talk to you about is a family that lived in Shenzhen, which is on the border with Hong Kong. And this started off the video, and it showed the mother was taking her son across the border from China into Hong Kong to go to school. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. She had to get special permit. But what happened, this was a second child, and so she went to Hong Kong to have the second child. When she was pregnant, she gave birth in China. And so now her child, since he can't go to school in China, has to go to school in Hong Kong. So every morning she would bring the child across the border to attend school in China. And she tells her oldest son, hey, don't tell anybody, don't tell any of your friends at school here in China that you have a younger brother, because we don't want them to know. And so she said that they could have paid to get the ID card for the second child, but it would have cost them 35,000 euros. 35,000 euros, and that's a lot of money, and they didn't have that kind of money. So that's the first story about the family that lived in Shenzhen, and they have to take their child across the border every day to go to school in China. The second story was about a young lady. Her name was Li Shui, and she was 21 years old, and she and her family lived in Beijing, which is the capital of China. Back then they called it Peking. And she barely leaves the house, according to the story. She can't go outside very much. She can't go to school either, and her older sister goes to school. And she used to ask her mother when she was young, why can't I go to school? Why can't I have friends like my older sister? And her mother would tell her, well, you're different. You're not like the other children. And she said, why? And her mother would tell her, well, you don't have the proper national identification, so you can't go to school. So she basically lived at home inside the house, pretty lonely existence, and spent all of her time with her parents without leaving the house. But it was interesting that her older sister actually was very good to her, and they were very close. So her older sister actually taught her to read and to write Chinese and educate her. So she was educated, but she had never gone to school. So when she was born, I guess, or when the government found out about it, Family Planning, which is the national organization that kind of governs the planning of families in China, how many children you can have, they said that when she was born, they asked for 600 euros, or equivalent to 600 euros. But the family could not pay that because they only earned $8 or 8 euros a month. So the government said, pay 600 euros, we'll give you the ID card. The family only made 8 euros a month. But now each year that the girl has grown older, the fine has increased. So now they would have to pay 12,000 euros. 12,000 euros. That's money that they just don't have. So this girl, Li Shui, was watching on TV, and she heard about other children like her, and she decided, hey, I need to do something. Maybe if we all get together, we can make a change. So she used her older sister's ID card. She went to the library and started to study law books in China, because she went and asked some lawyers in China if they would help her. and nobody would help her because they said it was just too dangerous for them to do so. So she said, well, let me study these law books and maybe I can find something in there that would help me. So every day she would ride her bike to the library, use her sister's ID card, and check out books or take books home, study the books. And see, she said that she found something in some of the law books saying that any child born in China is supposed to be registered, whether they were, say, legal or not, whether they were the one child, the first child, or the second child, it didn't matter. Regardless, every child needed to be registered and given an ID card. So she asked to go before the local government there and we say plead her case or make a case, tell her story, and see if they would change the policy. But it's a sad situation. She went with her father. She made her argument, and then later they sent her a letter saying that her request was denied. Her request was denied. And they were very upset and sad about this. So that's the second story. The third story has to do with a family that lived in the countryside in a small town about 500 kilometers from Beijing. And most of the families in the countryside followed the one-child policy, although, like I said earlier, if you lived in the country, you had the option to have a second child or request to have a second child if your first child was a female. But in this town, everybody abided by or followed the one-child policy. And they were very strict because every 3 months, the family planning people would come to the village with some equipment and they would check or test all of the women in the village to see if they were pregnant, to make sure that they weren't having a second child. So for 20 years, no one in the village had a second child, and there was a family. The wife actually had birth control so she wouldn't get pregnant, but somehow something happened, an accident, we say, and the wife became pregnant. And they were very, I guess, afraid of what was going to happen. And family planning found out about it, and they said to the wife, hey, you need to have an abortion. You need to get rid of your second child before it's born. So they didn't like this, and the wife, and they had an older daughter or older son. They fled to about 30 kilometers from the village. They fled to maybe a family and stayed with them for 7 months. And the family planning came to the house looking for the wife, and the husband said, my wife left me. We're getting a divorce, which wasn't true, but it was a story. So the wife ended up having the second child. Then eventually she returned back to the village where they lived. But the family planning people found out about it, and they said expelled the family or kicked them out or made them leave the village. And then they wanted them to pay a fine, but the family didn't make enough money and they couldn't pay the fine. So they took the husband to the police station and they asked him again, hey, you need to pay 6,400 euros or 6,400 euros. And this was equal to about 6 years pay that the husband would make. So he only made 1,000 euros a year, and the police wanted him to pay 6,400 euros a year. But he did eventually ask some friends and family, and they loaned him the money. So he went to the police station, he paid the 6,400 euro, and he got a receipt. It's like showing that he had they paid the money. But then we say the police blackmailed him. They blackmailed him. They kind of lied and they tricked him and they wanted him to do something else. They said, no, well, we're not going to give you the ID card for your son. What needs to happen is your wife needs to have a procedure called sterilization, which will make sure that your wife will not be able to have children anymore. And the family didn't want to do that because that wasn't, we say, part of the deal. that wasn't part of the agreement. But the husband had, say, tape recorded these conversations so he could prove that they were trying to blackmail him. So he went to family planning, the government, but nobody would help him. They just ignored him. And they just told him, hey, if your wife doesn't get sterilized, you won't get the ID card for your son. And then every 3 months he goes to the family planning people that come to the village and again argues his case and said, you need to give me the ID card, but they simply ignore him. So those were the 3 stories that were part of this video, which was very interesting. I could say it was very eye-opening. It's some things that I couldn't imagine happening to me or people in my family. I don't know if you could imagine it happening to you or your family. So were you able to understand the story that I told you? What did you think? So let me ask you a few questions and think about it and see if you have the answers. So what are the names, or what are these children called that are second children? What are some of the names we could call them? Okay, we could call them hidden children or extra children, as they were called. What is the name of the policy that these children were born under in China? What is the name of the policy? Okay, the name of the policy is the one-child policy. Do you remember how many children were born in China, second children, illegally? You could say under the one-child policy, how many children were born as second children? If you said 13 million, you're right, 13 million children. In the first story, what did the mother have to do that was very interesting in order to get her child an education, to have her child have an education? What did she have to do? That's right, she had to take her child every morning across the border into Hong Kong to go to school because he couldn't go to school in China. The girl that lived in Peking or Beijing with her family, Li Shui, how old was she? How old was she in the video? She was 21 years old. 21 years old. Do you remember how much money the father or the family earned initially? How many euros per month the family earned? Remember, the government asked them to pay 600 euros when she was born. Yeah, the family only earned $8 a month. And do you remember how much the fine was now? That had increased from 600 euros to what is the current amount of money that they would have to pay to get the ID card? It was 12,000 euros. And you remember the story, the third story about the family that lived in the countryside? And they were very proud to follow the one-child policy. How often would family planning come to the village to test the women to see if they were pregnant or not? How often? Yeah, they would come to the village every 3 months to check and test the women to see if they were pregnant or not. And what did the police do to the husband? What is the name or the word that was used that the police kind of tricked the husband and wouldn't give him the ID? What is the word that was talked about? Yes, right. The police blackmailed. The word is blackmailed the husband and the family. So hopefully, how many of those did you get right? Was it easy to understand, easy to follow, easy to remember some of these details? Hey, well, let me know what you thought of the video. This is just a little bit something different. And I found that there's a lot of teachers saying that it's good to learn English through stories. Learn English through stories, and you can also practice your listening comprehension as well as your kind of retention of information. How well do you understand what's being said and retain the information in your brain? So that's it for today. It's a little bit different video. Remember, you can do 3 things for me. Hey, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell your friends about it. All right, well, that's it for today. Hey, have a good weekend, wherever you are in the world, happen to be in this blue marble we call the earth. And we'll check you next time, and hope to have you follow me and let's watch more of these videos on, hey, Learn Everyday English. Talk to you later. Goodbye.